Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the Real Turkey channel, which is the only English language channel broadcasting from Turkey. We're in Turkey, right? In Turkey. I want to address a question that vexes international observers of Turkey, and it is whether Turkey is becoming more Islamic, more pious, more religious. Now, a few important distinctions need to be made. Turkey is clearly a Muslim country in the sense that 95 to 99% of its population professes to be of the Muslim religion. We have very few non-Muslim minorities in Turkey. But there are two types of Muslim nations. Some Muslim nations are on a Sharia regime. That means they are ruled or governed by the edicts of our holy book, the Quran. For instance, Saudi Arabia is in a Sharia regime, where the courts rule according to the precepts of the Quran rather than the modern civil law or the case law. Iran, although it's Shia, is also an Islamic republic. On the other hand, you have countries like Turkey, which are predominantly Muslim, but they are secular republics in the sense that even though the people are Muslim, the laws are mostly borrowed from the West and modern concepts, and they make a distinction between mosque and the state. Mr. Erdogan has been the ruler of the country for almost 18 years and president the last 4 years or so, and he's known to think great. He has these crazy projects of huge mosques, tunnels, roads, etc., and the Istanbul airport, which is a monstrosity. I mean, you can't find your way in there. And lately, he is trying to build a ditch or dig a ditch across the Istanbul peninsula called Canal Istanbul. But these are merely engineering projects. He also ventured upon a very ambitious social project, social engineering project, which is to Islamize the Turkey. Most of the Turks are Muslim, but they adopt the secular lifestyle, as you see. Mr. Erdogan wanted to change that. I don't know if he wanted at the end to establish an Islamic republic or to impose the Sharia law. I don't want to read his intentions, but it is very clear that he wanted, in his vision, he wanted to see a nation that's more devoted to religion, that lives its life according to what the Quran is believed to have said. That project has always worried Turkish secularists, who obviously have a Western lifestyle, and they fear that the Islamists will eventually restrict their rights. It also worried Western observers who thought that Turkey would eventually gravitate to the ranks of the countries like Iran and Saudi Arabia, which are ruled by Sharia. Let me assure you this is not happening. In fact, despite Mr. Erdogan's monumental efforts and the huge amounts of money spent on Islamizing the nation, Turkey is becoming more tolerant, and if not liberal, then at least less religious. And this is not a personal opinion. I can verify this account of events by several sociological surveys. But let's first start with explaining what Mr. Erdogan is doing to further Islamize the nation. One tool that he uses is Turkey's Directorate of Religious Affairs, or Diyanet, which is sort of the highest religious authority in Turkey for Sunni Muslims. Its budget is now the fourth or fifth among the ministries. It has several 100,000 personnel, and it not only tries to run the religious life of Turks, but today almost every civil servant must have graduated from one of the clerical schools. All must be a former employee of Diyanet to be promoted to higher ranks in civil service. Diyanet is also active in Germany, rest of the Europe, Africa, and the Balkans, etc. Diyanet also does marriage counseling, preschool teaching. It does almost everything except to run the spiritual lives of Turkey. Gender segregation is another important priority. Gender segregated schools are increasing. Mr. Erdogan is establishing a university for females only. In several Anatolian cities, public facilities are literally gender segregated. A very disturbing new trend is that the secular state schools are being closed or converted into madrasas or religious schools or imam hatibs, even though a poll by SODEV, Social Democracy Institute of Turkey, reveals that parents don't want to send their children to these schools. It is not a religious issue. These schools have an awful educational record. They can't place their students in good universities. So clearly, parents, whether they are devout Muslims or secularists like me, do not want their children to abandon school after high school. So forced conversion of these schools and mandatory Imam Hatip schooling has become a major problem even with conservative families and has increased resistance to AKP. And Mr. Erdogan constantly makes reference to a Muslim style of life where we should eschew the pleasures of our mortal life to deserve heaven and make sacrifices to be good, to earn the paradise, even though he lives in a palace with 1,000 rooms and buys a new plane or jet or car every other day. But of course he is different, so the same rules don't apply to him. Have these efforts worked? No, they haven't. For instance, there is the survey by Konda, which is one of the leading survey agencies in Turkey. It has compared Turkish youth of 2008 to 2018. And it has found that today's Turkish youth is much less religious. Among females, those who wear the traditional Islamic garb of turban or the veil or the headscarf has declined somewhat. Fewer Turks pray 5 times a day. Fewer Turks abide by the traditional month of Ramadan, where you fast from the break of the sun to the sunset. There are several other surveys which confirm these findings. One, in fact, has raised eyebrows. It was conducted by a religious charity called Ansar, which concluded that 12 to 15% of children forced to be sent into religious schools denounce Muslim and become deists, just to make sure that we and the Westerners use the same concept. Deist means believing in a creator, but not necessarily in a religion, or that's how Turks define it. And that actually has become a major problem for Muslim scholars, because that poll is repeated time after time. It shows that as you try to impose more Islam on Turkey's youth, the internet generation simply refuses to accept it and become less religious. In fact, there was a very good article in Financial Times by Laura Pitel, how Turkish youth resists conservative mores. And if you come to Istanbul or to any of the major cities, you would see Turkish females in traditional Islamic garb holding hands with boys, going to rock concerts and having their bellies pierced, which is not a criticism or mocking of the Muslim traditions. It just shows flexibility and adapting to the times, trying to live a good Muslim life in 21st century without sacrificing your religious beliefs, but trying to integrate in a society that's changing rapidly. Most importantly, from a political and economic perspective, AKP has become a victim of its own success. AKP has brought the poor, rural Islam population from the villages to the cities and has done enough economically to make these poor people richer. Now, the new AKP voter lives in the cities, is middle class. It has become the bourgeoisie. And the bourgeoisie is known for its conservatism, but not necessarily religious conservatism, but conservatism in the true sense of the word, meaning that they wish to conserve what they have. And what they have is the property, the jobs, the income, and the wealth they have accumulated over the last 15 years. So their first priority is no longer ideological. Of course they care about Muslim, but what they care about the most is property rights, the rule of law, a good business environment, respect for human rights so that they don't get arrested, their property is confiscated. And they are much more tolerant about other faiths or creeds, simply because in a village, usually everyone belongs to the same faith or to the same church. But once you come to the city, you see that, even Sunni Muslim comes in 100 different colors and everyone has a different practice. Just like in the United States, you find several, for instance, Catholic or Lutheran churches who are slightly different from each other. As a result of that, the new AKP middle class has become much more tolerant, much more westernized, much more individualistic in its religious practices, and doesn't really care that much about Islamization. It cares about accumulating wealth and preserving the status quo in terms of a secular republic that abides by the rule of law. Political Islam, dear watcher, is dead in Turkey, as it is dead in Iran and even in Saudi Arabia. But unfortunately, Mr. Erdogan hasn't received the message yet, but soon he will. Don't you worry about it. Turkey is secular and it will remain secular. One final word, it's amazing. Mr. Erdogan has probably always considered himself to a rival to Turkey's national hero Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. And during his time, all vestiges of Mustafa Kemal Ataturk have been erased from Turkey, but it's been rediscovered by the new generation. Now you would see thousands of young people with Mustafa Kemal Ataturk tattoos on their forearms. Thank you very much. You have watched Atilla Yeşilada at Real Turkey channel. Do subscribe or watch. In fact, preferably do both. And if you want to go further, you can even, tell your friends that this is a good channel to watch. Bye-bye now.